I
Well, hey,
know. Yeah.
it's nice to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out.
Nice to meet you as well. Thank you for inviting me on the show.
You bet. So where are you located?
Berlin, Germany.
Oh, okay. I heard you say Scheitze, and there was when I love it. And when I was in high school, I had a foreign exchange student from Switzerland, and he said that all the time, and I had no idea what he was talking about. And I was like, "What are you saying?" And he was like, "It's just shit.
Yeah.
That's what we say, you know." So
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah. For everything.
absolutely, he said it constantly. So I was
Uh-huh.
inspired. But it's great to meet you. And
Nice to meet
before
you.
we get into your life, your busy existence, I want to know, how did you survive the last 3 years with COVID? How did you get through it? And how has it changed the way that you do things now?
I started a study, and so I was in a way skimming over it because I was the academic looking from the outside in. But then I was also hearing from people all around the world and how they were coping. And so I was aggregating coping mechanisms for myself in real time from hundreds of people. So, not sure it's a healthy coping mechanism. There's probably something in there, but that's how I managed to get through it. And then I never really itched to travel like most people because I moved to Germany halfway through. So I cheated in that way too.
Yeah,
How'd you do? You're in Kansas City, right?
I'm in Kansas City. Yeah, and
Love your city.
what's that?
I love your city.
Oh, really? Cool. So where are you originally from?
Mhm. I grew up outside Detroit and I've lived
Okay,
all over the country. And for my first book, I drove through most major cities and interviewed
okay,
people there. So there's a couple people in my book from Kansas City that hopefully still live there,
okay.
or are buried there.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, right. Well, the one thing about Kansas City is it's so spread out. So there was ample places to go to, nature places. And I
yeah,
live next to a
your
nature
river
sanctuary.
walk is like, oh, so gorgeous.
Yeah, it is. And they're building that new stadium. Patrick Mahomes' wife is building the stadium right there on the river.
Oh, cool. Oh,
Yeah.
great. Well,
So it's good.
yeah.
They're putting it to good use. So anyway, yeah, but the thing I find interesting about you saying you looked into this, especially with your background in anthropology, it's going to take a long time for us to pull the microphone or the magnifying glass out so that we can see what this has actually done. What's COVID done to us as humanity?
Yeah.
It's affected every single
Yeah.
person on the planet in every possible way, sociologically, psychologically. It's just a quagmire.
Yeah. 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 I mean, anyone who says that they're not affected by it are in denial and probably are actually bearing some trauma from it.
Yeah.
Everyone has had something, something has changed.
Yeah, for sure. So let's get to the essence of what you do. I'm going to hypothetically put you in front of a bunch of third graders. Career day. One of the kids looks up at you and says,
Love it.
"What do you do for a living?" How do you answer the child?
Yeah. I actually speak to school children often, so I love this question and I
Cool.
love talking to them about it. But what I would start to tell them is that I own my own business, and I'm helping people with their businesses. So when they have questions or concerns and they're not sure how to take their business to the next level, because it can be really complicated, that's where I come in and I help them sort things out and get things moving better for the business, but also get a lot of their time freed up because we don't like to work very hard for all of our lives, right?
Yeah.
um, and then I would expand that, if they really that I'm in business apology is. And so I tell them, this is the study of what makes us human. And that can be really interesting and useful in a business setting because business is about relationships and interactions with humans.
Yeah.
Um, and then we get into some really fun conversations.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. On this path to where you're at today, it all begins somewhere. Where were you born and raised, and what were the seeds that were planted into you to become who you are, to have this fascination with helping businesses and looking at the human angle of things? I mean, you're not just working a job, you're giving a lot and you're helping people out. How did that happen and how did it evolve
Mhm.
for you?
Uh, I'm not sure that it had much to do with where I grew up. Not really. I grew up kind of the black sheep, so I knew I wanted to be not a doctor, lawyer, or engineer. And really, the first person I really looked up to, like fame wise, was Princess Diana. And I remember doing a report on her when I was in elementary school, and then I remember how shocked I was when she died, because I think like that was a reality check. Like, it wasn't the first death I've experienced. I've been experiencing death since I was 1.5. So basically every couple of years, somebody in my family passes on. So I have a pretty extensive elder group in my family. So the death wasn't new. It was just like somebody that I looked up to in a really specific way passed on. But I knew that what was calling me to her was her altruism. But I didn't know what that meant at the time. And a
Right.
couple of years later, that then attached to Bono, which I get made fun of for, but I think history will favor my choice.
Yeah.
um, but I saw someone who like was multi-talented, which I feel I am, but then um, was intelligent enough to pull together all those talents to not only do something, business wise, right? Music is a business.
Yeah.
You interview plenty of musicians to know that.
Yeah.
But then also to do something that was a positive effect on the world. And so I really, like, I saw that it was possible. And so when people would tell me like, the nonprofit world, or like humanitarians don't make any money, blah, blah, I was like, I think I can do it. Um, and so I think that's how I ended up, yeah, figuring out a
Yeah.
way to do it.
That's cool. That's great how you tied Bono into, I mean, I've always been a fan of the music, but I would have to think the world understands if they take a minute out how much he's worked with, like the Gates Foundation and all these other
Mhm.
places to kind of make the world a better place, impoverished places
Yeah.
around I mean, he's done an incredible amount. And there's plenty of artists out there that have the star
There are.
magnitude of him and they don't do it, like Mick Jagger and all these other guys. I mean, they just don't. I mean, they have
Yeah.
probably charitable things, but Bono is kind of an exception to the rule.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's definitely musicians who will go to Live Aid, for example, and they'll play a charity show, but they're like kind of like staying in their lanes. And,
Yeah,
my degree is in anthropology for a reason. I don't believe in staying in your lane.
yeah, yeah,
I don't believe
yeah,
there are lanes.
yeah. So how did the timeline work? How did you get from the States into Europe? And what was that like? How did you adjust to that kind of shift in everything?
Like you were talking about the trauma of the pandemic, and I think like everything. I wrote a poem in 2020 that was published in the New Feathers anthology, and it was called Quicksand. And I was using this analogy that the stony rock beneath us had turned to quicksand. It had disintegrated, and we were slipping, and we didn't know what was going to happen. But eventually, the ground would solidify again, right? And we had this moment where each individual could determine where the ground would reform in their lives. And if they didn't make a choice, then the ground would reform regardless, and other
Yeah,
people would have made that choice for them, right?
yeah,
Um, because I felt like we were living on quicksand, we moved to Berlin at the very beginning of 2021. We actually left the United States on Inauguration Day. Didn't mean to, didn't like plan it that way. But that's when our flight, like the cheapest flight, which looking back, like I never would have chosen to fly out on that day because I just would have been so afraid of like, you know,
yeah.
shit going down.
Oh yeah, I get it.
Um, but because of that quicksand, like I wasn't seeing friends or family anyway. Like my business was already up in arms, so like what's a time zone change?
Yeah,
um I don't speak German, but we moved. Berlin is so cosmopolitan and
yeah,
international that English is the lingua franca. It's actually hard to learn German in Berlin.
yeah,
um and then when we got here, everything was still in lockdown, so like we couldn't go out and do things. There was no overwhelm because we were just kind of like, I was sitting in an apartment in the United States. Now I'm sitting in an apartment in Berlin. I can hear the sirens outside are different, and I can see the plugs are different, you know?
Yeah.
So it was in some ways just experiences might have been.
Yeah.
And in some ways, probably there's plenty of like things I haven't processed yet because it was such a tumultuous time, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I would imagine, yeah, there was already a lot of heavy going on. Kind of reminds me of
Yeah.
America. It's like we got this pandemic going on, and Americans are so good at throwing gas on it. Then we turn it into a class war, a race war, everything else that
Yeah.
you can imagine. But you know what? It's just emblematic of the fact that the car for America has been teetering on the edge for a long time with social issues and things
Yeah.
that we haven't resolved. So you throw in
Hmm.
like a global pandemic and everybody being inside for months and months and months. It's like someone
Right.
got the key and let the zoo open and the animals ran.
Right. All structures are suddenly dissolved,
Uh-huh.
right? So here's
Yeah.
the quicksand. All structures are suddenly dissolved. And so we don't have anything that is distracting or pacifying or like whatever wordology you want to use, right? Like none of those things that reinforced the existing mores of the country are there anymore, except for, you know, like you said, friends and family. Like that was kind of all we had for a minute. And then
Yeah.
thank goodness, at least for the majority of people, they were able to access some sort of financial support.
Yeah.
Although I, you know, again, I interviewed some people who were just really going through it.
Yeah. The metaphor for quicksand's very apropos because there was times where we thought we were coming out of it, then a variant would come or something would happen. So it's
Right.
like you get one leg up and then it pulls both down. It's just it's very so you had
Yeah.
mentioned Bono, you've mentioned some names, but ultimately who's been kind of a motivator, a role model for you in your life?
I mean, there are others, but you know, like it depends on what field we're talking about. Because on the micro level, yes, it's an anthropologist. I admire Paul Farmer. He's an anthropologist who took the systems of anthropology that, you know, we don't impose what we think is right on other people's and combine that with medicine in order to open up new avenues for providing medicine to people who are not white Americans in
Hmm.
a way that would be supportive to their societies and to their cultures. Sadly, he passed away. I think during the pandemic, he passed away very recently. But he was really my main like motivator as an anthropologist. If we go into writing, I really admire Robert Heinlein. He's a sci-fi writer. He
Yeah.
wrote today. You know, that's probably his magnum opus. It's a book about what makes us human, right?
Yeah.
And so I admire his ability to write, and I think, okay, like if I can wordsmith even half as good as him, right, then I'm going to go in that direction. But I do often come back to this idea that like if I can do something big enough or impactful enough that like I'll get the attention of Bono. Like that's kind of it's absolutely ridiculous, but that's a little bit of my North Star. So right now I'm getting into blockchain technology and seeing what I can do in business in that way, because I think there's maybe something that we can unlock here.
Yeah.
And I want to ride that wave. I'm really curious, and I'm really inspired about the decentralization and the democratization that comes with blockchain. And I think a lot of people who are listening now are like, okay, what? And it's like, it's okay to not know. We didn't know social media first came around and everyone said, hey, this is it, you know? And now look at where we are. So um, I think
You,
it's coming.
you know, it's interesting. I'm actually right now listening to an interview with Jack Dorsey, and they were really trying to probe into how it began. And he was like, it was a texting thing. It was a global texting. It's kind of like YouTube. The very first video that was ever put on YouTube was the creators. They were, I don't know if you know this, but they were at the San Francisco Zoo and they took a video of a tiger and they wanted to share it. And they just were like, well, we got to come up with some kind of code and
Right.
platform, and that's it. And none of these people were like, well, we're going to come up with this revolutionary thing that world leaders and everybody that's alive can globally communicate. It just started very
Right.
aggro and simple, you know?
They saw the need.
Yeah.
They saw the need that, like, okay, I know I can, you know, maybe send a group text on my phone, but like with a video, that's really hard. It's a
Yeah.
really big thing.
Uh-huh.
And then, you know, what about other people that might be interested in it that I don't know, that I don't
Yep.
have their phone numbers, you
Yep.
know? And
Yep.
today with Telegram, like we don't even use phone numbers.
Yeah. Right. It's wild. It's wild. I mean, I often think about if we did pull somebody back from like even 50 years ago and said, okay, this is what we're doing right now, it would blow their mind. It would be everything that they saw in a Jetsons cartoon or something like that, you know? So
Yeah. And that's
it's,
what I was trying to capture in my first book. Like we can't pull somebody who has been like, I guess the closest you can come is if somebody was actually in a coma for the past 25 years. Like
yeah,
that's the closest you could get.
yeah,
But to me, the next closest then is interviewing the people who grew up with crank cars and seeing the first radio, seeing the first television. And like, how does this feel? Because we will like I grew up before before there was internet. You know, I had to call my friends to see if they were home. I had
yep,
to, you know, navigate parents in order to get through the gate, get to the
yep,
door and negotiate all these different hurdles. But I was young enough when it came about that it's just part of my second nature now. I'm
yeah,
used to it. But if you spent 50 years or 75 years without it, now what is
yeah,
that like?
uh-huh.
And we can't tell, I can't begin to understand that. That's why I went to talk to the people who actually get it.
So speaking of doing that and being a writer and being a curator of story, what is it that ultimately motivates you every day? We have things we look forward to, things that ultimately pull us forward. What is the motivator for you?
You know, I write down the three things I'm looking forward to every morning. And I also write my lessons, things I've learned in the evening. But um, all the past couple of weeks, I'm always writing, either reading or writing as one of those three things. I'm always really interested in either digesting the stories that I'm hearing, an essay, poetry, fiction, whatever I've got going on, or reading. I just got the Best American Essays of 2021
Yeah,
book, and you know that the 2021 book is an aggregate of 2020's essays.
yeah,
And so it, you know, there's pandemic, there's Black Lives Matter, there's all this stuff that happened that year. And it's so much, it's so interesting to sit and read this and get back into that so soon afterwards, but also to see the artistry of explaining what's
yeah.
happened. Um, so yeah, reading and writing are like two of my very favorite things to do.
Right on. Well, and you know, you are a curator of stories, so if you could meet anybody
Mm.
alive on the planet right now and interview them, who would it be?
Oh my God. You know, I probably have a really, really good answer for this. Um, that like later on I'll think of it and be like, oh, why did I say that? But I think at this moment, I think I'm really curious to interview Margaret Atwood because she is also an aggregate of stories.
Yeah.
Um, but she has curated from real life to
Hmm.
build her stories. And I find that fascinating and also very important.
Yeah.
So just sitting to have a conversation with her would be really, really nice.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's people like to preserve their stories. I tend to go to the everyman because I think that preserving what society likes to call unremarkable is actually the most remarkable. The, you know, you're my story. Um, we don't have to actually change the world. We've lived a life. They say that every person's mind has an entire library of information in it. You know, your experiences in Kansas City archive what's happened in Kansas City for the past, you know, however many years you've lived there,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, I walk down the street and here in Berlin, I've lived here long enough that um, I've seen storefronts change now. And so I can go, oh, I remember when that was, right?
Yeah.
So there's this archival history of place, not to mention then culture and experience and timeline. And so there really is a lot of value in just interviewing people who you would say is, you know, average Joe.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot more there than people give credit for.
Absolutely, I agree. So let's go into your life, dig back a little bit. Let's say you have a dream tonight. You run into the 20-year-old version of yourself. You could give that younger version of you a piece of advice based on what you've done in your life, the wisdom that you've gained. What would you
Mm.
tell that young version of you?
Stop being afraid. In some ways, I was really, really audacious. I took a year off university in order to join the National Civilian Community Corps, which is funded through AmeriCorps in the United States,
Mhm.
but functions more like the National Guard. So we train on bases across the states and deploy to disaster relief. And that was really good. That was, I had these moments of gumption, but I also had fear kind of holding me back from maybe um, getting the full experience that was available to me. I didn't say yes, perhaps, as much as I would have liked to. So maybe stop being as afraid or say yes more often. And because, the worst thing that can happen is what? You get arrested. I've done it. It was uncomfortable. I was climbing on abandoned roller coasters in New Orleans. You're not supposed to do that.
Yeah,
But like, it's such a great story and it was a fun experience. It was worth it. So like, I don't, what's the worst that's going to happen,
yeah,
really?
right, exactly. So, as somebody that enjoys stories and I'm sure history, if you could go back and witness firsthand any historical event that's happened, where are you going?
You ask really good questions. I
Good.
appreciate you a
Thank
lot.
you.
Yes,
Right.
you're very good interviewer. I'm stalling. But you know what? I think I would go to the 1920s, Paris. I really want to hang out with Hemingway. I'd love to spend some time with Natalie Clifford Barney. She was a sapphic poet living in Paris. Um, I kind of yearn for that time where I could just rub shoulders with the people who were the thought leaders of the time. And Paris was really the center of that for a while, at least in the West. So I think that's maybe something that I come back to is just Paris or around the same time period, Arabia,
Oh,
like
wow.
to see the Middle East before the West got involved, because what an incredible place.
Yeah. Yeah, the cradle of civilization. So let's get to the essence of who you are. Everyone has a perception of you. You have all these bubbles of people, your readers, family, friends, clients, colleagues, but you live your life. You lead the show. What is your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I am somebody who really likes to challenge the status quo, uh, but doing so through community and connection in order to make sense out of this wild and crazy experience that we call life, and hopefully to leave the world a slightly better place, even if it just means I smiled at somebody on the train.
Right on. I got to tell you, as somebody that, really collected stories of COVID, I had a choice at that time what I wanted to do, and I really ramped up my interviews with the jazz community. Just I knew it was
Yeah.
gonna be good, and I have 2 teenagers, so they would listen to the interviews, and overwhelmingly, the community was positive, but one of the most stark moments that I had was with the partially blind singer Diane Shure, and her nickname's Deedles, and she lives out in the Valley in California. So this was probably around May, and no one really knew what was going on. We were all kind of fresh, and all of the tours were just melted away. So I get her on the
Yeah.
phone, and her cat's meowing. She's making coffee, kind of in disarray. And we're going through this, and I'm like, what is this like right now? What is this period like? And she explained to me she felt like it was her entrance into the world when she was a baby. Her dad wasn't around, her mom left her in the hospital, and she was in an over-oxygenated bubble, which is why in a tube, which is why her eyesight went away, and I was just sitting there like, "Holy shit." Like, she just, like, it wasn't some, like, anecdotal right now, it's like my entrance into the world mimicked right now, and I'm just like and she's sang with Sinatra, she's legendary. And it was like the way that she opened up that box and got real fast. It was crazy. And
Yeah.
then, of course, I couldn't really focus because the cat kept meowing. And she was like, is it okay that I got coffee going? I was like, it's COVID. It's fine. If airplanes fly over, it's fine. It's good. Like, I embraced all of that ancillary noise because it was
Yeah.
just a part of that. Like you said, being in Kansas
Yeah.
City in 2023, it's all a part of the cultural tapestry that we're all dealing with.
Right.
So
Yeah.
anyway,
And it's not something that we can mold and shape. Uh, I don't think we should,
yeah,
honestly. We've got enough like fakeism, right? Like
right.
we're tiring of Instagram. We can see the trend. Um, Stop with the photoshopping. Stop with just trying to make everything just so. Um, the longer I live and the more I dig into our stories and just how we're coping, the more I see that we really need our emotions, and not our emotions like ah, right,
Right.
like Elmo flapping his arms. And we really need to be able to feel what is happening in order to go through. There's a reason we use the phrase "go through something." You have to pass through it, and sometimes it's long, sometimes it's short. But if we don't feel it and experience it authentically, whatever that is, then that's when the stuck comes in. And there's people who really are still suffering emotionally from the pandemic because they walled themselves off, like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. So, Veronica, if anybody out there wants to pick up your books, learn more about you, anything related to your business and your life, where do they go?
The easiest thing to do is go to my website, veronicakirin.com. Kirin is spelled like the Japanese beer. I'm Croatian. That's a whole mystery. You can find everything at veronicakirin.com. So that's where my books are, right in the top, but that's also where all my social media is. On social media, I'm VM Kirin. So again, I'm out there. I'm on everything. I don't necessarily update everything all the time,
Yeah,
but I'm available. Community is very important to me, so I don't wall myself up.
right on. This has been great. Thank you for opening up. Thank you for the work you're doing. It's great that you opened the book up a little bit for us. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been a really great conversation.
Absolutely, it has. Take care. Have a good day.
Thanks.